right, thank you all for making time to be here. I know it's a busy afternoon, but I do appreciate you coming. I think you'll appreciate this and you'll enjoy it. Just have a few things to share. So for this specific PLC meeting, I do want to talk about assessment and some things that we can do possibly to help our students. I've tinkered with a few things and done a little practice for assessments and some intervention. So I will send this PowerPoint out. I've provided a table of contents for you guys to look at if you want to refer to anything. It's not a small print, but I think whenever you get it on your laptop, you'll be able to see that a little better. Here's our agenda. Outline a few things, and I've provided you guys with a copy of that already. So you guys should have that should have seen that in your email. Moving on. All right. So before we get started, I do want to review our health PLC vision. Let me turn on the light so I can see a little better. The Apollo High School professional learning community is designed to bring teachers together to commit to the growth and achievement of the whole student. This community will be intentional toward professional learning and growth in and out of the classroom in order to foster healthy collaboration, unity, decision-making, and decision-making around one goal, and that is student achievement. So, again, as always, when we meet, I think it's important to consider that, and everything that we talk about is focused around that vision. Next, I'll just keep the lights off, I guess. So, as a department, we have discovered through the collection of data, and you all already know this, it's not a big surprise to you all, but I just want to reiterate what our problem is. So, the collection of data has provided us a little insight that our students are not meeting expectations on our pre and post assessments. So, through our discussion, through collaboration, and summative assessment has revealed that our students have an understanding of the content. So having spoken with you all, having summative assessments, we do feel like there is an understanding. However, there is a gap there in the post-test. So at the conclusion of this term, students are not demonstrating content mastery. So we feel like we have had some discussion about how we can improve this. And again, this is just an idea, some things that we can consider. Intervention strategy standards. So standards-based grading. I know some of you all are familiar with this, but as a department, we have not implemented this other than a few conversations regarding some PD. This is a little new for us. So I believe as a department, we need to experiment with implementation of standard-based grading. Standard-based grading is a method in which student achievement is measured on their mastery of clear course objectives. Standards-based grading shifts the focus from a 100-point scale in which students earn a grade as they go, more towards standards-based grading, which relies on grading a specific standard or learning target, and students can demonstrate the mastery of specific and focused content. Implementation. So, in part of my assignment, I had to do a little research, and part of that was looking for articles or some content to support why we should implement this practice. So, in doing that, Patricia Scriffany, I believe how you say her last name, outlined 7 points in her essay, 7 reasons for standards-based grading. I have picked out 3 of those to focus on today specifically, so I want to cover those as we go. The first being implementation. So grades should have a meaning. So Scriffany makes the case that grades lack a specific meaning for students, teachers, and parents. It's difficult to provide qualitative difference between letter grades. So, for instance, if I were to ask the question, what is the difference between an A and a B, or what does an A mean? Or what, if a parent were to ask, my student received a B in this class, what does that mean? It's difficult to provide an answer for those questions. It can be a bit subjective. So, in order to do that, she says that each letter grade should have a meaning. In our current practice, an A simply means that it's a 90% to 100, and that's all that really means. So the first step, if we were to implement standard-based grading, would be to outline and define what each grade means for our students and how each grade represents student understanding of specific learning targets and standards. For example, if we were to grade an assignment, and there's more examples later on, but just briefly, if we were to grade an assignment, a student might receive a 3, which simply means they have met that standard. Or they may receive a 1, which means they have not met the standard. And then, of course, we have 2s, close to meeting, and 4 is surpass the standard. That gives us an exact definition of what a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4 will mean if we were to grade that student on that specific objective. So again, each grade should have a meeting. Next, Scrivener points out that we can control the grading practices. It's important to controlling grading practices in order to avoid bias and irrelevant grading practices. It is important that a student's grade reflects a student's proficiency towards a specific learning target. A percentage grade can mask the student's understanding. Grading specifically on content knowledge prohibits teachers from grading on attendance and/or effort. Grading of standards allows for parents, teachers, and students to understand how they perform on one specific objective. So again, this eliminates, like it says, any bias or irrelevant practices such as grading on attendance or grading on participation, something of that nature. So this is specifically, does the student understand the content? Either they do or they don't, and if they do, then if they surpass it, they would get a 4. If they did not meet the standard or they not understand the standard, then they would, I don't think, yeah, thank you. But I think then the 1 would be they did not understand. Okay. Our next point, the Scrivener points out, standard-based grading allows teachers a snapshot into what each student has mastered. This allows teachers to reflect on the overall class achievement for specific student achievement as it pertains to a single objective. So, for example, a teacher can take a snapshot of the assessment, and they can look at, okay, did the class as a whole understand this particular objective? Either they did or they didn't. Or they can look at specific students. So you may have, let's say, a summative assessment, and you're looking at 2 different objectives, and did the student master those objectives? Either they did or they didn't. If they didn't, then it allows you to go back and reteach, which is the next point here. If a class or student fails to show understanding toward a learning target, a teacher may return to the objective and reteach. If a student is struggling to master a skill, he or she is allowed to continue working towards mastering that standard without being penalized for needing additional time. So if the whole class, for example, let's say we screw up in our lesson that day, and they just simply didn't understand the method, then we can go back and reteach that. We understand that we failed, or they failed to understand the content that day. So we can go back and reteach the whole lesson, or specifically we can spend time with students who are struggling on that one area. And again, they can go back, since we're looking for mastery, we're going to allow them to go back and make up an assignment without penalty until they can show that they've mastered that standard. Additionally, it shows students who are meeting objectives and allows for a higher order assessment for those students. Standards-based grading allows teachers to tailor lessons and content to each student's needs. So, of course, we all have those students who excel, who do really well in class, who simply get it. We're going to understand how quickly, and I'll explain how quickly here in a minute, but we're going to quickly understand that they have a grasp on the content, they have mastered it, and they're exceeding those expectations. And then we can, of course, go back and tailor future lessons to make those a little more challenging or higher order thinking, those type of things, while other students may be, we can spend some other time specifically with students who don't understand, or they may be making up those assignments for mastery. Okay, so the details. In order to implement it in our classes, what we're going to have to do, we're going to need to organize and create assessment that's specifically aligned with health standards. Each question will need to be assigned a specific standard. So each part of our test, each portion of the test, each question will need to have a standard aligned to that. This will indicate if the student has understanding of that particular learning outcome. Additionally, we need to change the layout of our grade book. In the past, we have always assigned a percentage grade for an assignment. So for example, we would grade it and they would get a 90 out of 100, or 90% out of 100, or an 85% out of 100. But we're going to need to change that. So we're going to need to change how we grade and how we set up our grade book to be organized by learning targets, and I'll have an example of that here in just a minute. A student's grade will not be entered based on if they have they will be entered based on if they show mastery of that specific objective. So like I said, this is a little small, but you'll be able to see it really when I email it out. But it's a comparison to two different grade books. So this is really what we do now. An example, it's got the student's name on the left, their homework average down the middle, their quiz average, and their chapter 1 test grade. And they're all in percentages. So John got a 90 on his homework, a 65 on his quiz, and a 70 on his chapter 1 test. If we look down here to the standards-based grading grade book, it has the names, of course, but then in place of what the assignment was, we have the objective. So in this column, the objective is write an alternate ending for a story. And that student, in this particular case that she gives, this example, that student is either, John has partially proficient. He's partially proficient in that skill. Bill is proficient and in writing an alternate ending for a story. So you can understand pretty quickly how easy it is to look through our grade book and see, okay, this student is doing really well, this student is struggling, this student needs some additional work, etc. But that's, again, just an example of some implementation, some things we'll have to change. GradeCam. So as you all know, we recently got GradeCam. That's a fantastic tool. Some of you all are already using that, but it allows you to specifically, we haven't done this practice yet in our department, but it has the ability to assign a specific standard for each question. So you can go in, whenever you create your key for, let's say, number 1, you push, if it's multiple choice, push, if C is the right answer, you push C, and then you simply pick the standard that aligns with that question. This will provide, and then of course, once the student's done grading, you pull out your phone, hold over top of the quiz, it grades it automatically right there, provides you the data and the details. And since we have entered in those standards, it's going to tell us specifically how the score of students, what they understand, what percentage of the students got that question right, the percentage of the class that got that question right, that align with that standard. And so it's going to give immediate feedback to teachers, students, and parents in order to help progress or to help monitor what students' specific needs are in the classroom. Okay, so I implemented this in some of my classes, 2 exactly. So the first look is percentage-based grading. So I had 2 classes. This is just the style that we have been using. On a post-test, students scored 74.6%, and in Class B, 75.3%. Now, like we said earlier, if we just look at these numbers, it says, well, all it really tells us is that Class A got 74 point, if you round up, 75% of the questions right. But we really don't know anything other than that. Let me turn the lights on and see if I can. Okay. And then Class B, we got about 75% of the questions right, and that's about it. It doesn't really tell us a whole lot. But if I give the same assessment with standards-based grading, it looks like this. So Class A, Class B, and I've broken down 3 standards in this. So it says I can recall, I'll turn it off so you all can see it a little better. I can recall the number of cancer-causing carcinogens and toxins in cigarettes. So for this specific question, Class A, you can see here, 69.4% of the class got that question right, whereas 72.1% of the class in Class B got that question right. Second standard, I can identify the types of secondhand smoke and its effect on a person's health. 47.8% got that right in Class A, 46.3% in Class B. Over here, I can identify cigarettes use among teens and adults. Again, you can see the numbers. It specifically tells us, are students understanding the content? So if I look at this, so right here, I probably have some students that are doing really well and some students that are struggling in both that don't understand these, the first one and the third. So I probably need to go back and identify the students who don't understand the content or the objectives on those questions. But if you look in the middle, 47.8, 46.3. So as a class, both classes really struggled with this objective, with this standard. So it'll likely go back and I'll need to review with the entire class and identify why we didn't understand the types of secondhand smoke and the effects it has on the person. So we need to look at that, why we didn't understand that, and probably reteach at least parts of that lesson. In more detail, so that was again as a class. If you look at specifically to student, what standard-based grading information gives you. So again, I have the same objectives at the top, but I have student A, B, and C down here. So again, we have our chart that we talked about at the beginning. So a 1 means a student has not met the standard, 2, student is close to meeting a standard, 3, student has met the standards, and 4, students surpassed the standard. So student A, on his exam, he struggled with really the first 2 standards. As you can see, he got a 2, so he's close to meeting it, but not quite, and then a 1 on the second standard, he didn't meet it at all, and then he got a 3 that he met the standard. So looking at this, I can go back and say, okay, so for 2, he probably could do some independent work on his own and retake that assessment to show mastery in that standard. On 1, I probably need to go back with him and review that content and show him a little intentional time in order to make sure that he is getting what the purpose of this, he's understanding that standard. Okay, if we look at student B, he's got 3s across the board, so he met the standard. So he's achieving, that's where we want our students to be. He can move on, and so he will not have to go back to show that mastery of any of these standards. Student C, 3, he gets it, the first objective, he gets it, obviously. 2, he's really close. So again, he'll need to go back and probably spend some independent time on that standard in order to show mastery. And then 4, obviously he surpassed. So that one was pretty easy for him. And again, so the best way to get an idea of these standards is you got to include multiple questions for each objective or each standard. So if I just provide 1, it's going to be a little more tricky to get a true understanding of what they understand and what they don't. So again, you want to provide multiple questions for each standard. All right, so then I need to provide a modification to the intervention. In a class from a master's, we talked a little bit about this, and I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, but I wanted to try it out and see how it worked. So the modified, and I provided an example over here what it looks like, but the original intervention allowed teachers to pair standards for each question. Now we're going to do that again, same thing, but a method used by some other teachers, again, like which I tried, allows students to visually see and read the purpose of each question and understand what the teacher is asking by including the standard or the objective above the questions. So the questions are bracketed in and fall under each standard. So whenever the student gets the exam, they can read, I can recall the number of cancer-causing carcinogens and toxins in cigarettes, and they know that those questions under that objective pertain to that standard. So that's what I tried. In the second one, in my modification, and here's some comparisons. So we already went over the original intervention for Class A for these standards. We did see some progress for each one. So when I did the modified, so when I included the standards in those questions, each the class as a whole performed a little better on each standard. Same goes for this class. Now this is pretty marginal, but again, you saw some improvement for each. Moving on. Again, same thing. So on the left side here, you have the original and then the original intervention, and then on the right side, you have the modification for each student. Again, this is nice to be able to look at specifically each student and how they met their standard. But if you look, we saw some improvement, but for student A, we saw some improvement on this one, right? But 2 and 3 stayed the same. 3 was pretty similar, and we saw some improvement here for student C. So, some concerns about the modification, adding standards to the exam question versus standardized tests. So, it's no secret really that regardless of how we feel about it, the ACT, SAT, those type of performance-based assessments are going to be relative for our kids. So I struggled with this a little bit, thinking, is it fair? Are we really preparing our kids by adding the I can statements? Obviously, they showed that they did a little better when we did that, but are we truly preparing them? Are they practicing those skills to be able to sit down for an ACT, to look at a math question and, okay, does this apply to Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, et cetera? So you understand the point. So I kind of struggled with that a little bit, even though they did do better with the modification. I'm just struggling still. Is that effective, or I feel like maybe we're babying them a little too much with that. Obviously, I'm sure you guys have some thoughts that we can talk about later about that specifically. All right, so future implications. We all spend some time experimenting with standards-based rating. So I'm not saying this needs to be implemented tomorrow or next week. I think that you all can take some ideas, maybe even do a little research on your own and try to implement this in your classrooms. You could do a summative assessment or a formative assessment. You could tinker with it and see how you like it. I do think, I think obviously you can see that it's clear and concise how our students are performing. So report your findings. So we can meet again in a couple weeks, maybe next month, and say, all right, so what worked, what didn't work, what are the benefits, do you have concerns over this? And then ultimately, full implementation. So if we like it as a department, then we can all begin to implement this. I think I'm going to continue designing my assessments this way, continue to find methods or techniques that may be a little better or more specific. I'm new at this, so again, I'm sure I'm going to run into things that I did not expect. But again, we'll have time to change those. So I'm not saying it's just full implementation right off the bat, but I do think that it would be wise to play with it a little bit and see what we can figure out is best for our students. And of course, references, and like I said, I'll email this out to you all, and you can take a further look at it. And I know it's getting a little late, and you all probably need to head. So let's plan on, if you have questions about this specifically, how about we write them down, email them to me, or we can talk tomorrow. All right, thank you guys.